I know there's a lot of you out there who are looking to upgrade the sound of your home theater system by changing or upgrading one or more components. The question is, which component should that be? Or maybe you don't even need to upgrade anything, but just change a few settings here and there. Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. Stick around. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. And on this channel, we review, demo, and compare the tech that entertains you. And today we're talking about which component will have the biggest effect on the overall sound of your system. Now, of course, there's no universal thing for everyone that if you change it, it will result in a much better overall sound to your system. If only it was that easy. But in this video, we're going to go through a list of components and settings that you can change to have a big effect on the overall sound of your system. And the links to everything I mentioned in the video, of course, will be listed in the description. Now, the first thing on the list is actually a power amplifier. Now, a lot of you out there actually just have a receiver powering your system. And in that case, the receiver has a very big job because it processes the audio signal and it also powers your system, your speakers. And the internals can only fit so much circuitry, so it can't power your speakers as well as a dedicated power amplifier could. But you can't just attach an amplifier to any receiver. Your receiver has to have pre-outs. But in the case your receiver has those, then you can connect an external power amplifier. Now, I would recommend at least a 3-channel amplifier where you can connect your left, center, and right speakers, your front stage, because those require the most power because they're doing most of the heavy lifting. And that's just the minimum recommendation. A 5-channel at least would be best. So your left, center, and right and your surround speakers would all be powered by the power amplifier. And when speakers are powered with an external amplifier, they tend to sound more dynamic and open and just better than when it's powered by a receiver. I know that the first time I used an amplifier with my speakers, it was an eye-opening experience. It sounded so much better, and that's why it's the first thing on my list. Now, I've had a great experience with the Outlaw Audio Model 5000 amp, and I would recommend it any day. But there's also ones from Parasound for a better build quality and more capability, and there's also some from Emotiva, of course. And I've also heard good things about OSD Audio's amplifiers too, but I haven't had the chance to personally review any of their equipment yet, so all I have at this point is conjecture. The next item on the list, and probably the most obvious one, is a subwoofer. Now, subwoofers are an interesting topic because having one is nice and perfectly fine, but having multiples is better. And that's a key component of my recommendation because having one subwoofer can tend to lead to bass localization. So that's where you can identify which corner of your room the bass is coming from. So the overall experience will never be as immersive as it could be because you'll always hear the bass coming from, say, that right-hand corner of your room. And that's why multiples is better than one. Now, having one large subwoofer is great, but I think having 2 smaller ones is even better because bass is additive. So when you have multiple, then it will increase the overall LFE in your room. And of course, there are ported and sealed subs, and that's a matter of personal preference, but I'd recommend that if you're primarily listening to movies on your system, then having a ported sub would be better, but that actually requires more space than a sealed sub. So they actually have their pros and cons as far as that's concerned. So if you have capable speakers that you are comfortable playing music with without a sub, then you can use the ported sub for only movies and then use your speakers only for music. That's what I do because my speakers, the Arendal 1723, are capable enough to play music by themselves without the need of a sub. But for movies, you cannot do without a good subwoofer. And there's no shame in the game. In my case, I have the SB4000 from SVS and my smaller Pioneer Elite 12-inch sealed sub, which I've had for a number of years now, but it just helps to balance out the overall bass response in my room. And I feel no real need to upgrade that at this point. Maybe when I actually do an overhaul of my entire system, which will probably happen sometime coming up. So if you have the space, I'd recommend the ported sub, because a ported sub can act as a sealed sub, especially with the modern subs with their DSP. So you can plug those ports and it can have the response, the tighter response of a sealed sub, but a sealed sub can't mimic a ported sub. And as far as options go, if you are in the market for a sealed sub, then the SVS SB4000, the JL Audio E12, which is an amazing sub, by the way. Then there's the SVS SB2000, which is also a great option. I've had all of those subs in this room and I really liked each and every one of them. Then there are ported options like the Monolith 12, which is THX certified, and the PB3000, which is an amazing sub, as well as the Arundel Sound 1723 1V ported sub, which I recently reviewed. And if you want to get even crazier, then there's the PB4000 from SVS and the PB16 Ultra, which is the top of the line sub from SVS and one you have to pay a bit more for. So in that case, I honestly recommend you have, or you get two smaller, say PB3000s or two PB4000s. But that depends on the size of your room and how much bass you want in your system. But having multiple subs will lead overall to a smoother bass response and just a better overall audio experience. The next thing on the list are ceiling or height speakers for Dolby Atmos or DTSX. Now, Dolby Atmos and DTSX are the newest object-oriented sound formats, which I'm sure most of you have heard about by this point already, and they create an atmosphere of sound, hence the Dolby Atmos, by spatially representing objects throughout your room, whether that be behind, to the side, the front, or above. Now, I know installing ceiling speakers may seem intimidating or even daunting, but there are a bunch of options. So if you don't want to cut holes in your ceiling, then you can always use elevation speakers like the ones from SVS or Klipsch for that matter. I did a comparison a while back of how upfiring ceiling and elevation speakers compare, and elevation and ceiling speakers were really close, with the upfiring speakers coming in third. And the upfiring speakers aren't necessarily usable in all spaces. So if you have, say, a slanted ceiling, then you can't actually use it in your space. You need to have a flat ceiling for it to work. So having ceiling or elevation speakers might be your only option depending on the type of room you have. But I can say it leads to a much more immersive experience, especially when you have effects panning from behind your room overhead to the front of the room. It is very immersive and will certainly elevate your system. But to enjoy any of that, you need the next item on the list, which is a receiver or processor which is Dolby Atmos capable. Now, of course, you don't need the highest end receiver or even an 11-channel one to enjoy Dolby Atmos, because you can have an Atmos setup with only 7 channels, say 5 terrestrial speakers and 2 above. So you need at least 2 above speakers to properly create a Dolby Atmos environment, but having more is better, but having 2 is fine also. There are of course guides to help you place them in your room so you can have the best experience. You don't need 4 or 6 ceiling speakers for an immersive experience. Now, of course, there are other benefits to having a modern receiver, like network music playback, for example, from like AirPlay 2 or Hios from Denon or Play-Fi from DTS. But sometimes it's not about actually spending money to get new equipment, but actually using the existing equipment you have to their fullest potential. And in this case, it involves setting the right crossovers. Now, I think using speakers without the right crossovers is like driving a car in the wrong gear. Sure, it works, but it doesn't work as well as it could. And it also could damage things. So the crossovers basically set the point where the audio signal transitions from one speaker to the subwoofer. So for example, the point where the bass from your surround speakers transitions to the subwoofer. Now, your surround speakers generally can't play bass signals that well, so at a certain point it has to transition to the subwoofer, which is built to create that LFE, that low frequency effect. So the crossover point for your speakers will vary depending on the type of speaker it is and the frequency response of said speaker. But I created a video a while back as well that explains how to find the best crossover for your speakers, and that's helped a bunch of people so far. So if you want to know the best way to find and use crossovers in your system, then watch that video. It's linked up there and also in the description. The other thing that is really important and involves buying nothing at all but is super useful is actually speaker placement. Now, I don't mean like placing your speakers in the front of the room because, you know, we all know that, but I mean the distance apart. So for example, your front stage, your left and right speaker should form a triangle with your head at your main listening position, basically. So the distance between the left, the right, and your head should form an equilateral triangle. The speaker should also have some towing, which means aiming them slightly towards your listening position. That helps create some better stereo imaging. And that's useful for both listening to music and watching movies. And the center channel should also be aiming directly at the main listening position. And ideally, the tweeters of the left, right, and center channel should be on the same plane, but that's often not possible depending on the layout and the furniture in your room, but it should be as close as possible. I've seen way too many setups where the speakers are right beside the TV and the main listening position is a few feet away from it. So it's definitely not ideal. And ideally your surround speaker should be to the side and slightly behind you if possible. The next item on the list, and just as important as any equipment you can buy, is actually acoustic treatment. Now, hard surfaces reflect sound, and the more hard surfaces you have, the more reflections you have of that sound, which creates echo and just an awful overall experience. And you don't want that. And soft surfaces absorb those sounds and not reflect them back at the listener. So that's what you want. Now, there are things you can get like acoustic panels if you have a lot of bare walls in your room that reflect the sound back at the listening position, or things like bass traps if you have a problem with LFE decay. But there are everyday things which can help with that as well, like your furniture, so say your sofa, and having carpet, because if you have a listening room with hardwood floors, then I think you need a carpet. It's not even optional, because the floor will reflect the sound from the speaker to your listening position, and the sound reflected from the floor gets there slower than the sound from your speaker, so that's where you hear the echo. So having carpets on your floor reduces that, and so you won't have that echo, at least not as prominent as it would otherwise be. But yeah, if you're experiencing echoes or your bass sounds too boomy, because that's also an effect, then you may want to look into acoustic treatment. The final item on the list, and is just as important as any other item, is calibration. Now, calibration helps your system to determine where the speakers are placed and how capable they are. So using that, it determines their distance, their levels, and their crossovers. So there are calibration software like Odyssey on the Denon and Marantz, and there's YPAO on Yamaha, then there's Dirac, there's ARC, all of these. So the point is, use your calibration because it's very important, and use as many calibration points as possible. So some have up to 12 spots where you can do the calibration, and if you can't do all 12, it's not the end of the world if you can't do all of them, but do as many as possible because it helps your system form a better profile of your equipment and to help it calibrate them better so you can have a better overall experience. And that's it. Now, let me know in the comments which thing you have changed in your system which led to the biggest improvement in sound. Let me know in the comments below. And those of you who haven't done any of these things yet, let me know in the comments which one of these you plan to use and how well it works for you. And if you actually want to buy any of the things I mentioned in the video, then feel free to use the affiliate links in the description because it helps support the channel so we can bring you more content. And also buy these awesome t-shirts in the merch store because I think they look great on you. I really do. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villaman saying be safe and peace.